Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired justice of the New York State Supreme Court. Pablo Feldman was a character like Douglas MacArthur was a general, larger than life. He had a flair for doing whatever he was doing, whatever that was, at any given time. He was recommended to me by another client who happened to be a Latin American gentleman who was a travel agent. Turns out that Pablo had so-called a minor problem involving 5 blank validated Pan Am airline tickets that had been perhaps stolen, and these things, all you had to do with them was to fill in the destination, the name of the passenger, etc., and they were ready to go. And that meant, in those days, it was in the mid-1980s, and around the world ticket was valued at about $2,500 a piece. So, he had 5 of these things that were pretty valuable. Anyway, he came to the office, and he was quite a charming guy. He was absolutely charming, in fact. It turns out he had come to the United States from Buenos Aires 5 years earlier with his wife and children. He was a family guy, and he had been a furrier there and worked here also in New York as a furrier. He was very gentle. He was totally articulate, and he had a natural twinkle in his eye with an easy smile. The sum total was he was totally likable. The guy was a really likable guy, and I got kind of fond of him. He told me, don't worry about this. I said, listen, this is a problem. No. He says, I'm in the hands of Madre Maria. Well, judging from his name, I didn't think he was Catholic. Madre Maria is Mother Mary. I think he said, my wife is a devotee of Madre Maria. And the way he made it sound, it was like in Argentina, Madre Maria is a mythical character, sort of maybe roughly equivalent to like Lady Luck. Lady Luck was on his side. Everything was going to be okay. Madre Maria was going to take care of this. I was saying, well, I hope she can help me, because who knows what this is going to be. I no sooner take the case that I get a phone call, and the guy's from Interpol. He's an agent, and he said, Mr. Greco, you represent Pablo Feldman? I said, yes, I do. He said, well, do you know that he has 5,000 stolen tickets? Those tickets were validated in New York at Pan Am corporate headquarters, and they were shipped on their way to Rio de Janeiro, which is the South American central office for the whole continent. And we think he's got them. I said, whoa, hold on a second. Do you think he's got them, or do you know he's got them? If you know he's got them, I would like to know, because I'm going to raise the fee. That's important. 5 tickets is what he told me he's got, and that's what they charged him about. And you're telling me about 5,000 tickets. So, how about it? Why don't you tell me if he really has if you know that he has the 5,000 tickets? Well, that didn't go over. This guy didn't think that was very humorous. I was treating it as a humorous proposition. But, this Interpol guy, like a lot of other guys and a lot of international and federal law enforcement, they didn't have a great sense of humor when it came to their cases. I think in our country, they got that from J. Edgar Hoover. That was his legacy. They take themselves pretty seriously. Anyway, the case moved on, and as it moved on over the months and the court appearances, I grew fonder and fonder of Pablo. And what's more, he was that rarest of criminal clients. He paid his entire fee before the case was over, and God bless him. That's a rarity in the criminal law business in New York. The motto of criminal lawyers is upfront. We used to say the presumption of innocence attaches upon payment of the fee. Pablo was a good client. He was a swell guy. And again, he was a lovable guy. He was actually a lovable guy. Well, 6 months into the case, and a possible plea came up, proposed by the district attorney, and the judge was going along with it. I think what it was he had a prior clean record. The charges, there was no violence involved in any of his activity. I think the judge and the ADA on the case were personally charmed by him, because he was that kind of a guy, an infectious personality, and he won them over. He was a sweetheart of a guy. DA proposed, and the judge agreed to a possible e-felony plea. In New York, the lowest felonies are e-felonies. They start with A, which is murder 1, kidnapping, things of that nature. deadly arson, that sort of thing. And they go down A, B, C, D, E. E is the lowest felony. It's just one step above a misdemeanor. And the judge said, we'll give him the minimum sentence for an E felony, which is 5 years probation. And that's subject, of course, to a probation report. So the case, that was acceptable. Pablo, thought that was okay. I thought so. Everybody figured out that was a right and fitting thing to do, and it sort of fit the circumstances well enough. The judge put off the sentence for 6 weeks to allow probation and everybody else to file reports, a sentencing report. And then the judge would look that over. And if it was uneventful, then we can proceed with the actual sentencing that the DA and the judge had agreed to. So 6 weeks go by, comes the sentencing date, and I show up in court. Pablo's there, and immediately upon entering the courtroom, a court officer comes up to me and says, the judge would like to see you in chambers. Uh-oh, I said, here's something. Let's see. This is not, I don't know, it's not going to be routine. Well, I go back, and there's the judge, and he's got a scowl on his face, waving a bunch of papers in his hand, and says, have you seen this? I said, Judge, I'm sorry. I don't even know what you're talking about. No, I haven't seen it, but I'm listening. He said, well, this is his probation report, and I have letters here from Interpol and the FBI that says Pablo has 5,000 tickets. I said, well, that's, and I went back and I recounted my conversation with the Interpol guy. I said, that's just speculation. That's not what I know. And if they have no proof, that's just innuendo. I said, I wouldn't give that too much credibility. He said, yeah, but there's something more. I said, well, what's that? He said, well, these papers here are from Argentina, and they're his criminal record. He's got 30 years of ongoing criminal activity in Argentina. I said, what? He says, yeah, take it, look at it, read it. It's in Spanish. He said, but you can figure a lot of it out. He said, I said, Judge, give it to me, and I'll go and look it over. And he said, sure. He said, then come back in after you finish going through these papers. I said, okay, I will. So I went out, and Pablo was in the courtroom, and I had my poker face on because I didn't want him to think there was any problem, and I don't want him cooking up excuses on the moment, although I'm sure he had something in mind anyway, now under these circumstances. So I went out, and I quietly read through the probation report and the papers. It took me about 15, 20 minutes. And Pablo was there when I finished, and I told him about it. And he said, don't worry about that. He says, no, let me explain. That criminal record, I was a little bit irate. At this point in time, I figured this guy's taking me for a ride. He said, no, Rudy. He said, no, please. He said, listen, those things that are listed there are in Spanish. Those things are not crimes in Argentina. Those things are civil problems like bounce checks for different reasons, unique reasons, or the shortage on a deposit, or this, that, and the other thing. He said, I'll get a transcript and a translation, and you'll see. When I get this, I'll go through the Argentine consulate and get that. He said, these are not crimes. I didn't commit any crimes. The only crime in Argentina is to be poor. He said, and I wasn't poor. He said, so I'm not a criminal. He said, I promise you, we'll find out. Well, the judge adjourned the matter. I told him, look, we're going to get an official transcript, a translated transcript through the Argentine consulate, and we need a few weeks, or maybe about a month or so. So the judge was very kind. He said, we had been showing up. Pablo was no problem as far as coming back to court or anything like that. And the judge gave me the benefit of the doubt. Maybe, there'll be some explanation for this whole record, which didn't look so good. Well, a month came and went, and it was time for sentencing. The night before, I called Pablo's house to confirm. I'll meet him at the courthouse and everything else. And I spoke to his daughter, and she said, oh, Mr. Greco, I'm sorry. I said, what are you sorry about? She says, my father's not here. I said, well, where is he? He's gone. I said, oh, good. Where did he go? We don't know. I said, oh, wonderful. I can't wait to go to court tomorrow. Well, the next morning, now I'm looking to speak to the judge in chambers. And I get the court officer, and I said, I want to talk to the judge. He said, sure. And by the way, the judge, I had known the judge. I had a lot of cases. The judge, I had a lot of credibility. And I walked in. He said, what's going on? I said, Judge, he's gone. He skipped. I said, I called the house last night, and this happens in criminal law from time to time. Not all the time, but it's not unknown for this to happen. The guy made what we call leg bail, he hit the road. So Okay. I said, I had nothing to do with this. I said, I asked the daughter. She said, he's gone. They don't know, no surprise, they don't know where he went. He's just disappeared. And we don't know that he's coming back. He said, okay. He said, look, I said, I have nothing to do with this. He said, I know you had nothing to do with this. He said, you don't even have to say that. He said, yeah, you're off the hook. Don't worry about that. He said, but I do want you to go out and put a statement on the record as to what you just told me now, about him not showing up and you spoke to his daughter, et cetera, et cetera. So I did. I went out and I recited the whole, sad story about his disappearance and everything else. And then the judge took his turn and he said, well, all I could say is good riddance to another crook that America doesn't need, he said. No doubt, he said, your client, Mr. Greco, is off to the land of the tango. He said, and I assure you, if he comes back, he will be the guest of New York for 5 years in the can, he said, and he'll be dancing to another tune, I assure you. I said, thank you, Your Honor. I think it's time for me to go. Make sure you relay that message to the daughter and make sure that he gets it there if they ever find him. I said, of course, Judge, if they ever find him, they'll tell him. No problem. Well, I never saw Pablo again. And 5 or 6 years later, through the grapevine and the other travel agent who referred him initially, I heard that he did go back to Buenos Aires. And in Buenos Aires, he had eventually been arrested. And the reason why he had gone through 30 years without any serious problem in criminal law was because the chief of the Buenos Aires police force was his childhood friend. And that guy ran interference for Pablo all the time, much to the chagrin of the arresting officers who were really aggravated every time he would walk out, with a smile on his face, charming smile, and he'd walk out, wave goodbye. And these guys were frustrated. Well, the story I got was that there was a regime change in Argentina, which there was. And consequently, the police chief of Argentina that was no longer. And the new guy came in and had no such feelings of friendship and kinship for Pablo. The understanding I had was that the cops who had been frustrated beat him to within an inch of his life and threw him in the slammer for a few years. And I said, well, wow, there's a turnaround, Well, the story's not over. 10 years later, I heard through the grapevine, Pablo is back in the U.S., and he's selling airline tickets. Now, I didn't see him. I don't know anybody else. I got this from my source. I said, oh, boy. And that all brought to mind the words of the famous boxing manager and trainer, Cus D'Amato, who was Floyd Patterson's manager, Mike Tyson's manager, Jose Torres' manager, and a character, And Cus D'Amato used to say, and I think it was very apropos, it came to mind as soon as I heard that story now about Pablo. He said, Rudy, in the Bronx, we have a saying, people born square ain't gonna die round. And I guess that applied here. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.